Welcome to Out of the Question, a podcast that looks behind some common questions and uncovers the question behind the question while providing real solutions for biblical world and life view. Your host is Andrea Schwartz, a teacher and mentor and founder of the Chalcedon Teacher Training Institute.
Thanks for joining me again for this episode of the Out of the Question podcast. Today, I am joined by Kay Rubacek, who is a documentarian and author. She has extensively researched human rights abuse under communist regimes with a decade-long focus on abuses by the world's largest remaining Communist Party regime in power today in China. Her current investigations are on the long-term social effects of Marxist culture. Kay, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So today I'm going to focus on a lot of the work you've done, but primarily a book that was recently published entitled, Who Are China's Walking Dead? And the promo for your book says that it serves as a warning to citizens of the free world of what could become of us if we fail to understand the operations and culture of a Marxist state. So in fact, what you're saying is we could become the Walking Dead.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, that was the conclusion I came to, and it wasn't a conclusion that I wanted to come to, but that's unfortunately where I landed. Yeah.
Well, strong medicine is meant to fix things that aren't right. And I would have to say both your book and your documentaries are strong medicine. As a matter of fact, as I was listening to the book, because I did it audio version, I was telling my husband about it. And then he said, well, what book should I listen to next? I said, you should listen to the book I'm telling you about. He says, but you already told me about it. I said, you should listen to the book. Well, he's in the midst of the book, and he said, you were so right. You couldn't have described it better than she described it. So I do think that people should either read it or listen to it to have their eyes opened for things that they may have chosen to be unaware of. But before we get into the book, I'd like you to answer the question, why does all this matter to you?
To me personally?
Yes.
Oh, I so often I'm asked about why should this matter to me? Why should this matter to Americans? Why does this matter to me personally? It's because, I'm a mother now. I've got 2 children and teenage children, and I want them to have a place where they can find freedom in the way that my family was able to find freedom, because they escaped communism. My family escaped communism from 3 countries over 3 generations, first in Russia in the 1920s, and then in China in the 1950s, where my father was born and raised with his siblings in China because his family had to escape Soviet communism in Russia. Then when they went to China, that was prior to the Communist Party coming in there, but they had to escape once the Communist Party came in. There was famine, there was death, there was murder, there was political persecution, all those things that come along with that sort of totalitarianism. And my husband's family also escaped communism under the Soviet communism in the former Czechoslovakia before the Berlin Wall fell. And, I've seen that my family was so fortunate to have a place of freedom that they could escape to. And in my case, my family all went to Australia. But, Australia's got its issues now as well. And most countries are really falling prey to this ideology, this communist ideology. You can call it, there's so many different names for it. But basically, I want to make sure that there is a place for my children to go to in the future. Right now, I see America's still is the freedom standard and capital of the world. And I really value that so much more since I've moved here, because I really didn't understand it so well before. So that's my long answer to that question, because I want that freedom for my kids. My family were lucky; they had a few options. There's not many options where people can run to these days from tyranny, but also there is a weight that comes, I find, when you have, when you become aware of certain crimes, and the crimes that I've been uncovering are really, I mean, I cannot think of worse crimes in history than some of the ones that I've documented in my documentaries. And there is a weight to that, but there's also a responsibility. And I feel like if after Nazi Germany, the camps eventually opened up and people asked the questions, the grandchildren asked the questions, what did you do at that time? Did you know? And I feel like, one day my grandkids may ask, because the camps will eventually open up. I really believe that in China and other places. And the truth will eventually come out over time. And people will say, did you know? And what did you do? So I feel a responsibility there to be able to answer that question to my children and grandchildren in the future and say, well, I tried. Yes. So that's my answer.
And that's a very biblical answer, in as much as to whom much is given, much is required. So God is the one who led your family to be able to go from being under a tyrannical regime to greater freedom. And I think one of the problems with modern American, especially people in what we would call the boomer generation and subsequent, is that we haven't really experienced war on our homeland. And it's very easy to become complacent and figure it's no big deal if it's not happening to me. But your family has a heritage of recognizing the problem and wanting to do something about it. And so I think you would probably say, I haven't heard you say it anyplace else, but I think you would say you can't do otherwise than expose these deeds of darkness.
Oh, you said it. You said it well. I like that. Yes. And it really is. It was God that led my family to safety, at least on my side. My husband's family, they grew up, in an atheist environment, and that's what they knew. Whereas my family were all religious believers, very devout, and they wanted to maintain that freedom of thought. And even though my husband's family were atheists, they also wanted to have freedom of thought and freedom of belief. And even though they weren't religious believers, they still felt that they, as human beings, they wanted that. Whereas my family were very clear, and I'm sure they were led by God through really very dangerous situations to survive what they did. And that suffering, as much as we all want to avoid suffering, it does make us stronger when we come through the other end. And I think in our modern society, we keep trying to negate our suffering and make ourselves more and more comfortable. But then we find that life becomes harder to live because we're always trying to numb the suffering. But I think there is a lot of virtue that comes and growth that comes from that suffering. And I see that from my family, what they've been through. And certainly Australia hasn't been through any wars in the nation, and our generations here in the US, what have we experienced? So I think we can, many of us just get a bit too comfortable, and it gets harder to look at people who are suffering and want to help them if you haven't had that experience of suffering, or only see suffering as a negative. But I think a lot of people of faith really see suffering as something. There is a long-term plan if you really trust the Lord's plan. And that's something I think we need to keep reminding each other.
Exactly. We can see that if you don't exercise, if you don't move around, if you don't pay attention to what goes into your body, you can become flabby and sick. And I do believe that your warning is an important one, not because people look to be under tyranny, but if that's all you've known, or you've been led to believe that it's okay. One of the things I focus on with the people I interview and the podcast in general is the appreciation of truth. What is true? Because there is an absolute truth, and that comes to us from the scripture. But every regime, every society that seeks to dominate other people are really trying to appropriate the things of God. So they want to become God in the lives of those people. And maybe you can speak a little bit more to the situation in China. If there has not been a foundation of biblical Christianity, people still yearn for freedom, but they don't understand that truth and liberty come from God, and we need to do it on God's terms.
Yes, this is a fundamental issue that we really need to, I find that we really need to talk about and really have discussions about. And my understanding and what I found through my research is I've interviewed more than 100 survivors of communism from different regimes. And my primary research has been on those who have come from China, but I have also interviewed those from other regimes too. And the comparison is there's a very clear line. Those who grew up in countries that had some level of freedom, what we would call freedom, freedom to religious freedom, freedom of thought, freedom to run a business, for example, those basic human rights, what we see as human rights. People who grew up, say like my family from Russia, they knew a world before that communist tyranny came in. So once they relocated to another place, they were able to hold on to that original culture that they had. They kept their faith, they kept their culture. I was so blessed to grow up in a family that brought that culture even to Australia, and we would celebrate all of the traditional Russian holidays and all of the events through the church as well. And it was just something that I just felt I was exposed to a very rich culture. And it was the culture prior to the Soviet communist culture. So my family were able to adjust. They found freedom, and it was hard because once you find freedom, I find that those people have to forget tyranny, because it's too hard to live in those memories of tyranny all the time. So you have to put it in a box generally and put it away for now. But it's there, and you know your experiences. But you can adjust to freedom. But people from China, now the Communist Party has been there for decades. It's actually been established for 100 years now, been in power for about 70. During that time, we've seen generations grow up only under communism, and they know nothing else. And that is the impact on their sociology, the way they think, their psychology. It's very different to those who experienced freedom before. And so because they didn't have any exposure to faith, to God, to any type of, maybe through grandparents. In China, there are traditional beliefs that have been passed down for thousands of years, but they were wiped out during the Cultural Revolution. So prior to the Cultural Revolution in China, there were still memories of traditional Chinese beliefs and belief in God. But after the Cultural Revolution, it was no longer, you were no longer allowed to have that faith. And so everything became, as you said, under the human beings, the communist members, leaders wanting to play God over the people. So God got moved by human beings to a position below the Communist Party. And that's what these people have grown up under. And I've interviewed so many of them from all different age brackets. And what shocked me, and I was really surprised, was that so many of them, I was surprised at what a high percentage moved to America because they say they want freedom. And I'm talking anywhere from students to the elderly. I've interviewed all of them. And they ended up going back to China because they got here and they couldn't understand our freedom because they never knew it. They knew it from maybe some movies or something that they saw, and they said, America has something we don't have. But when they get here, they're not used to being told what to think. They don't know how to understand this concept of freedom, where one man said to me, and I talk about this particular account in my book, how he was a high-ranking official in China. He wrote speeches for high-ranking Communist Party members as well as laws for the Communist Party members. And when he came here, he watched speakers at a rally outside the Capitol building in the US one day. and he was observing, and he said, they spoke without a speech. He was absolutely flabbergasted that an American official could just talk from his or her own mind, his or her own heart, and they could say God. They could say what they thought about any political party. And he said that's absolutely impossible, unfathomable, hard to believe as a Chinese citizen. And some of them stay, but many go back because they are so used to being raised under totalitarianism and being told what to think, how to think, that they have a void. And if they're not fortunate enough to fill it spiritually, then they go back to the party to fill that void. And that's terribly sad, but that's really a reality.
And I've spoken to a number of Chinese Americans, they're now citizens, and they're frustrated, even in their churches, that there's so many Chinese who came to escape something, but they didn't escape it in their mind. So whatever the media says here, they believe. Whatever they're told to do, they believe. That you can't quite get underneath a presupposition that has been there since birth. And it's very frustrating to him, because where we might get frustrated, Kay, that why don't Americans care? He's frustrated because he can't get Chinese to care.
Oh my goodness. It is such a dilemma, isn't it? Because we think we should really be the ones leading that, or we say, what about these survivors, victims of communism? They should be leading and guiding us, or helping us stand up against tyranny, or helping us learn about how we can defend ourselves from becoming what they've become. And that's precisely why I wrote my book, because these people cannot speak for themselves. They cannot help us in that way, other than by showing us what we could become. And I'll mention another story that I go into detail in my book about, but I'll just mention it briefly. There was a woman who was doing translation for us for an interview, and she was it was a very long interview. We did very long interviews just so the interviewees would really they don't have a lot of trust in people. A lot of these, certainly the higher ranking Communist Party officials. So I would really try to get as much time with them as I could once I got their trust. And so when I was interviewing one, there was a translator who was listening in the other room and doing simultaneous translation for me. And so she heard a very long conversation. And when she came out, she was shaking. And she said, Kay, you're talking about the Chinese Communist Party, and whenever I say those words in Chinese Communist Party, she said, I feel this warmth, moving in my heart, in my breast, in my soul. And she said, it's like the warmth of a mother, and what I think about when I think of my mom. And she said, and I hate it so much. She says, I hate that feeling because I know the Communist Party has done so much harm to me and to my family and to my country. But she says, I have this feeling because that's what I've grown up with since birth, that I love, that she was taught that she loves her oppressor, that she loves this tyrannical regime that is essentially trying to play God on earth. For one thing, for her to recognize that, it was very profound at that moment, because she realized that something had taken hold of her soul, in a sense, and she felt it. And she'd been living outside of China for at least 20 years. And then she had this realization during this interview, and she felt something within her shift at that point, or maybe perhaps she felt that there was this specter of communism, as Karl Marx called it, a specter, an evil specter. I added the evil part. He didn't call it an evil specter, but she perhaps felt that in her. But I hope that also she felt that she was able to remove some part of it in that moment, or over time she will be able to, because it's very hard for them to first comprehend it within themselves, let alone to be able to speak to us about it or discern media and messages that they get. Because in China, under a totalitarian regime like that, without having a divine law, a recognized divine law above human law, being able to have that faith, they really all they know is what comes from the media mouthpieces that are all run by the state. And so they're not taught to question. They're not taught to have discernment. They're not taught to look for truth. So their absolute truth is told that it comes from the Chinese Communist Party. But even if they know it's not true, because they still see that sometimes there's just blatant lies, but they are told that they know they just have to accept those lies, and so they won't speak anything of it. So it's very hard for us to expect. I think we need to understand that we cannot expect them to be the champions against oppression, or to help us champion. I mean, there are some articulate and very intelligent ones who have, I think, done a lot of soul searching, and they exist. I've interviewed a number of them, and they're wonderful. But there's majority of them are wonderful, but wonderfully unable to articulate or haven't found that spectre that within themselves yet that they really, I think, need to remove. And those who have taken that next step to being able to process what they've really been through, because it's very challenging.
Yes, indeed. Some of my listeners may remember that number of months ago, I had a discussion with someone who had suggested I read the book called Wild Swans. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. Yes. Okay. So it basically goes through 3 generations of women in China. And one of the things that struck me was how easy it was for the Chinese communists to come in and promise a better life, because a lot of what had gone on in China prior to that was oppression, was people taking advantage of other people. And I was struck by the fact that the Bible says the truth will set you free and that wisdom begins with fear of the Lord. Well, if you don't have that basis, if you think you must always do what you're told because that's the highest good, then it becomes pretty obvious why communism could take a stronghold, because the people were sort of geared toward that. And yes, there were things that were bad, but it's not like the Communist Party has righted those wrongs. They just transferred the oppression from one group to themselves.
Yes. And it's interesting, looking at the history of the Communist Party, it's a complete monopoly. It's a completely different system to what we know of as government in the West. And it's not really run as a government. There is a government of China entity that's called the government of China, but that is not the Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is another entity. It has its own constitution, has its own laws, and the government has its own laws. So the Chinese Communist Party really exists more in a parasitic type of way. That's sort of really the only analogy that I've been able to use that I feel is most accurate. And I've gained that from many learned scholars who have looked at this for decades before I was even born. And really, it does come down to, I see the structure within the government, and then this entity that has monopolized the entire nation and its people. But because it enforces atheism, it enforces a breakdown of the family unit, so that there is nothing, trying to minimize as much as possible any gap between the individual and the state. And that includes parents, religious pastors, anybody. It just really removing all of that, so that the individuals are all directly connected into this state apparatus entity, which is controlling the government, controlling all of the institutions, but it is above all and trying to connect directly with all of the individuals. So the individual rights are destroyed. It's really a sort of a mechanization of human beings, which is what the Soviets were really seeing it and promoting it at the time. And And people seem to be excited by science, and we can be so productive and things, which, nothing wrong with being productive. We've been given these talents by the Lord that I think we should use. But when we remove God from our lives, or forcibly remove it from the lives of a nation, we end up with China. And China's the country example that we have, where the Communist Party has been allowed to rule for a very long time. Everywhere else, it has publicly fallen. But the Chinese Communist Party does have tentacles throughout. But we also, I think those of, people of faith understand that this is a bigger battle than a political battle. This is really a battle of good and evil, as in how I see it. And I think many others do, who understand that really, when you take that divine law out from society, you only are left with human law. And we are flawed. Who is perfect? Who is perfect enough on earth to say, I can rule over you? And absolutely, I think it is those human absolutes that really get us into immense danger and lead us on the path toward China's example, when we lose allow that sort of human absolute, and it's a socialist ideology of looking down on others and wanting to change mankind, and really not being willing to accept the Lord and the miraculous creation that each one of us are. And yes. I think that's what's lost in China.
Well, I've heard it said that you could sum up the Bible as the war between two seeds, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And in one sense, someone might say that's very simplistic, but in another sense, if you know history, if you know world history, and if you have a biblical lens on which to view things, then it becomes a lot easier to identify that instead of pursuing the dominion mandate, which the Bible clearly says we are, that these tyrannical regimes seek to dominate. And as soon as one person or one group is seeking to dominate another group, that's where you have the idea of people playing God and determining for themselves what's right and wrong. And one of the things you point out in the book, that the Communist Party will always be right, even when they're wrong, because all they have to do is rewrite the history.
That's exactly how they framed it, and it's exactly what they've done. They rewrite history, and just to prove their point. And if you look in the history books in China, you won't find a mention of the Tiananmen Square massacre, where 10,000 students were killed. If you do find a mention, it would only be referenced as a political incident. So they use euphemisms. I have a glossary of euphemisms in the end of my book. It's certainly not exhaustive, but it's a starting point to get us thinking, because as I was going through writing my book, I found this really it is language that guides a lot of our culture, and so much so. And when the language starts to be changed, for the purpose by human beings, for the purpose of controlling other human beings, as you said, one group trying to dominate another. When language is used, then it also changes history, and that's really dangerous. I get really concerned when dictionary definitions are, for example, being changed, or seemingly random, or without explanation, or institutions that we look to, and if they're changing or rewriting history, then we really are in it's something that we need to pay attention to, because it's to me, it relates to that concept of looking down and thinking, I am better, I know better than you, and that includes knowing better than history, knowing better than the past, knowing better than our elders, because that's what the communist socialist ideology does, is that by breaking down the family, one tool that they use is by saying that the children should guide the adults. And it's of course not to say that children aren't wonderful human beings that have wonderful creativity and ideas, and I learn so much from my children. But I learn so much more from my elders, and the respect for the elders is as essential as the respect for history. And so in rewriting history, we are disrespecting our elders, we're disrespecting our ancestors just at a human level, and we're giving free rein to our children and saying what we've done doesn't matter. Only what matters is right now for you, and what you do doesn't really matter either. So it perpetuates a very focused short-term thinking, which is connected to our technology is also making that expand further, where we just have this short-term thinking of, well, I won't read a book. I'll just scroll something on my phone. I don't know the source, but it doesn't matter. Whereas the communist ideology, the strategists behind that, those who want to really play God and take control over large groups of people through tyranny, they are thinking very long term. If you look at China, Xi Jinping announced that they have just completed, last year he announced that they completed their first 100 years of socialization, and they're looking forward to the next 100 years to becoming a very strong socialist country. So they are thinking very, very long term, and tyrannical rulers love it when individuals think short term, because then they'll forget history, they'll forget the past, they'll forget their faith, and they'll forget God. And then they can be completely controlled at the whim of any tyrannical leader who thinks that they deserve that position. That's a very scary situation.
And just so people don't think, well, okay, yeah, that's happening there. We're now fighting over the definition of inflation, recession, gender, morality, terrorism. So don't think it can't happen here. The reality is it is happening here. And part and parcel of that is that long-term goal you mentioned of positioning themselves in universities, in the media, in aspects of government. And one of the bugaboos I have with young people that I'm in touch with, I'll say, what book have you read recently? And they're like, I don't really read books. And it's like, okay, you're very easily moldable if you won't read books. I'm not saying which books you need to read, but if you read a wide variety of books, you'll get a sense that there are different perspectives on events, and you need a lens with which to view these episodes. Now, of course, as a Christian, I believe the lens should be the Word of God, but everybody's going to have a lens. Don't you agree, Kay?
Absolutely. And I think you need to have your foundation, and I think youth they'll search and they'll look at different things, which is great, but you need that lens. You need that something. And I think everyone is going to go through that searching process. But once you have that lens, and this is what I try to teach my children, is that you don't need to be afraid of society once you have that lens, because you can be discerning. You can, there's a lot of movies that I won't allow my kids to watch until they're a bit older, or until they're old enough to make their own decisions as adults. But if there's certain movies that I'll go and watch it with them. I'll say, you really want to watch that? Okay, let's watch it together. Then let's talk about it. And I want to keep that open dialogue with them so that so I feel that they are more prepared for society. Because if we don't expose ourselves to the reality of the world, and not in any way that it's harmful, we have to have the lens of knowing that, even if it's just that basic sense, knowing that there's a God. I mean, just that basic sense, knowing where we come from. It seems in some ways, for some people, that's even just that is a big stretch these days, which is a scary reality. But I think as people of faith, we just don't need to have fear. And that's always a challenge. But if we can just have that trust in God, then it just gives so much reassurance that if we see something, because we can't always prepare, we can't guarantee what our kids are going to see when we're not there. And I feel like I need them to be able to be prepared themselves, and also be willing and open to come and talk to me, and know that they can have an open discussion with me. And we may not always agree on things, but we can talk about things. And
yes.
having access to books and movies, especially books, because you sit with that book, you turn the pages. It's you know that you trust that author enough to give them your time.
Right.
And they put a lot of time into that book. It's different to just reading an article online where you don't really know the source. And did they research that themselves? You just don't know. So
Exactly.
You could be being duped. Yeah.
Well, the Bible says wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And I think a corollary could be tyranny begins with a fear of man. And when you have been raised, as I know a lot of the communist Chinese officials that you interview in the book, when you've been raised to know that the party is everything and there could be spies everywhere, and you better be careful, because even if you're not so concerned about what happens to you, things could happen to your family. But it's a whole different thing when people are afraid of other people as potential spies, potential informants. You have a society that gets used to keeping their innermost thoughts between their ears rather than discussing them.
Oh, this is one of the most devastating parts. Was this concept, because for us, we think of, I think of spies as in the James Bond movie, or, Mission Impossible or something like that. But in China, anyone could be watching you. Anyone could turn you in. There are people who are paid to watch and those things, but the concept is now the surveillance with technology, the amount of surveillance and money that the Chinese Communist Party is spending on their dominating their own citizens is more than they're spending on their military. So people tell me, oh, we're afraid of war with China, and that I remind them, I'm not saying don't be afraid of war with China. I'm saying China, the CCP, is spending more money trying to control their own citizens than they are on their own military. So the amount of surveillance there just shows what they have to do to control the human spirit. It is so much pressure for them, and they put that on themselves, and then they impose that on the nation and on the individuals. And then everyone gets sucked up into this system where every rank from top to bottom is having to watch others and assess, monitor them according to the party directives, and they know they're being watched too. And when you don't have that, like you said, that I like the concept you said, they can only discuss it between their ears. Many of these officials are afraid to do that too, because it could just come out. It could be seen. It could be seen in their eyes, the way they look at someone, the way they respond with a glance or a gesture. That could be interpreted. So they don't even want to have that conversation in their minds. Now, there is a movement though, so this is a hopeful element. People have been quitting the Communist Party, and I see that really as a step toward spirituality, faith, God, finding God, because they are removing the specter from their soul in a sense. And I think that's really quite real. And that gives me a lot of hope. A number of the officials that I interviewed had quit the Communist Party, and they said that helped them a lot. And so that was very inspiring to see that they were looking at it more from a spiritual aspect, because others had said to me, quitting the party, what does it mean? It's just a membership. But that was people more here in America. Whereas those from China who were more spiritually inclined or had really taken that step toward faith, they saw that it was significant in in an attempt to remove the mark of the beast in a way. And that I thought was very encouraging, because it allows them to think beyond their ears and take that step of actually doing something that will hopefully allow them to have a conversation with another human being about what they've been through, and give them that courage to eventually find the Lord and find a way beyond, just outside of the tyranny of man, and to get out of that fear of man, as you put it.
Right. The book of Romans tells us that all have a conscience, and we do know right and wrong. We would intrinsically know stealing is wrong. And I like to point out that's why when children take the cookie or do something, they hide it. They know it's wrong. They don't go advertise, look what I just did. But what happens is that sinful man suppresses the truth in unrighteousness. And with these Chinese Communist Party former officials, it seems as though, as much as they try to suppress the truth, somehow or other, the truth kept bubbling up, and they were forced to look at it, somewhat like that translator who had to come to the realization, I'm conflicted. My head says one thing, but my emotions say something else, and they're out of sync with each other. So I think having a less seared conscience produces courage. And I think that's what your book, when we hear these officials who had done some pretty dastardly things talk about it. And I was really struck, Kay, with the fact that they couldn't understand your questions at point, because it was like you were both from different planets or something, right? But they had conscience attacks, and that's what precipitated them saying, I can't do this anymore.
And it's those conscience attacks that reminds me that, we're all human beings. We're all made in the image of God. We may be of different nations, different skin color, different races, speak a different language, but we have that commonality. We've been blessed to be born on this earth right now. And even though, yes, sitting in the room with those, mostly gentlemen, most of these officials were men, and so sitting with them, and them looking at me as a young white woman and speaking, who spoke English and needed a translator, and yes, it really felt like we were on another planet sometimes. But I felt the best way that I could gain their trust was I had to be open to, I guess, because I feel I have my own lens where I'm not afraid of hearing their truth, though what they told me was not what I expected. I expected from the labor camp, the man who ran multiple labor camps, prison camps in China. I expected him to describe prison as like some sort of dirty place where they did terrible things and people who came through there. All my concepts, he didn't talk at all like that. And this was what blew me away, is that it opened my eyes to see my fellow human beings, more in a way that I hope that I can continue to do so, where I'm looking more at their hearts, more at our commonality, more for the truth, rather than being pushed and pulled by concepts, human concepts and notions of like, this person's like this person's like that. When I give them some time, and we did find common ground, and that was a really beautiful thing. And for pretty much all of them, we by the end of the interview, I gained their trust, and we'd built a nice relationship. It wasn't like that at the beginning of many of the interviews, but it pretty much all of them ended that way. So I felt that we'd both come to some different understandings of each other. And that gave me a lot of hope that within our humanness, we are able to really put out a helping hand to people like this in need, but also learn from them, while through our own lenses we can keep ourselves protected and be able to not be consumed by the specter that they succumb to, because they didn't have faith when the Communist Party, when they just grew up under the Communist Party, born under that party without God, under an atheist state. So we are the ones that have that blessing, and if they're able to find it, I think we should encourage them. And I think they really do need our encouragement, and they may seem like they're really from another planet. Yes.
Right.
But we have common ground. But I think it is on us to have a bigger heart to help these people.
Well, if you take a look at the world as it existed after the death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ, probably looked a whole lot more like communist China than it looks like freedom and liberty. So obviously there is something that transforms people. And I believe it's the truth embodied, Jesus Christ is the truth. But talk a little bit about how they view truth and the necessity of lies to bolster the propaganda that these former officials shared with you.
Yes. There's a quote from Lenin, who from Soviet Russian times, truth is precious. It should be rationed. I may not have quoted that precisely, but this is the concept of those who the strategists, and Lenin was a strategist who like what has happened in China, is looking down on society and wanting to play God and saying that I will ration the truth for you because it's a precious resource and not everyone deserves the truth, which is entirely different to how we see the truth. So it's when you try and look at it try and understand what Lenin was saying, then it's a bit easier to understand how in China, because the Chinese Communist Party still reveres and teaches and requires all of its officials and members to study Karl Marx and Lenin. They call it Marxism-Leninism. So they have to study that. And so they're being taught that truth is not absolute at the lower levels, but at the higher levels, it does exist, but you can't give it to people. You can't let them have it, because it's this concept of they are not worthy. They are not worthy of the truth. Thinking about us, just regular people, that they are not worthy, and that once you get into this elite membership of the Communist Party, then you are inducted in a way to think that others they're just not as smart as you, they're not as lucky as you, they're not as privileged as you, and they don't know any better. So we are the ones that have to guide them. This is sort of the socialist ideology. Same thing that permeated Russia under the Soviet rule. So their concept of truth is, we'll decide what we give you, and it doesn't matter if you really know the truth, because we are the ones who make the decisions. You're just not smart enough, and you're not worthy enough. That's the concept. And to me, that it's really treating fellow human beings as animals, classing them into groups and dehumanizing them, which is how their persecutions have taken place, particularly in China, by dehumanizing groups to a point where other citizens look at a group of people and they'll say, yeah, it's okay if they don't live. It's okay if they're tortured. It's justified. And that is so far away for so many of us to think that I could never be like that. I could never justify harming a fellow human being, or justifying torture or brutality or murder, or, as in one of my documentaries, the killing of innocent prisoners of conscience for the sale of their organs. You know, these are heinous crimes. And we saw what happened in Nazi Germany, heinous crimes where a population became dehumanized. And that's when the people outside in society look and they start to accept that, because they're accepting the Communist Party law instead of divine law, where, you know, all men created by God. So
Yes,
that's a significant, to me, it's the most fundamental difference, and how they're thinking and how they use truth. And I go into a lot of different examples in my book about how journalism, and I interview journalists and propagandists, and how they use truth and they twist and turn it and everything. But fundamentally it is that lack of belief in God.
yes. And, you know, I'm not sure how I would have reacted to this book had I not just experienced the last 2.5 years of COVID propaganda and masks and vaccines and distancing and all that sort of stuff, to realize that these tactics, this strategy, can appear in different forms. But if the one thing you're not allowed to do is ask questions, and by asking a question, you're automatically wrong, that's the kind of thing where I think that people who reeled against this idea that, wait, I have to stay in my house, I can't go out, I have to close my business, that this is the sort of thing that they'll understand better, because maybe prior to these last 2.5 years, they had never experienced it before.
It's very true. And for me, I've met with some really wonderful new friends in the last 2 years, people who have seen this happening and been really shocked. And some of them have said, so when did you wake up to this, Kay? And I said, well, I've been working on this for more than 20 years. And,
right.
And when I came to my realization, I realized that so much I didn't know. And it because it was in my family, and my family didn't talk about it. And then I had to have my own process. And I found that with everyone, we're all coming to see these examples around us now. And it really starts to, I find it starts to shake you at the core, where you really question your values. And I see it as an opportunity for everyone to reconnect with the Lord and think, really need to reflect and think about where you put your faith, which law do you really follow? I mean, we should be law-abiding citizens, but where is the ultimate law? And
Exactly.
and that to me is fundamentally important. And so when I first I had done these interviews for more than I started them 7 years ago. And when I published in 2020, I had sat on these interviews for 5 years, and I didn't want to publish them because I felt that, yes, it would be hard for people to understand, and certainly in America, because the culture, under communist culture, the ideology was too far away, and it was hard for people to recognize what was going on around them. I was more aware of it because I'd been studying it. And so I thought, how do I present this information? But when I saw what happened in 2020 and the subsequent, everything that happened with COVID, and we saw that the lies came from the Chinese Communist Party lied about the virus and was never held accountable. And we saw that so many countries, including our own, started to follow the CCP's methods of lockdowns and very strict totalitarian type procedures and policies. Then I really felt this is the hope, because from the Chinese Communist Party officials, many of them are very broken. And I thought, I don't want to just tell stories that leave people about broken people. I want to give people some hope. That's sort of a requirement I have in my own work. And I saw with what was happening in America, I saw some hope, because I felt we can learn from these people. Yes. We can learn from China. And this is an opportunity we have. China is the worst example we have of where a country can go under a godless society controlled by social ideology, the specter of communism or socialism. So that's why I published this book, and the reception has been very good to it, and I think it's because people are more aware. I have had criticisms from people saying, "Oh, I do like reading about China, but I don't see the totalitarianism or the tyranny seeping into the West as I do reference." I didn't go too hard on that in my book, because I wanted it to be open to all sides of politics. but I wanted to focus on the facts. I wanted to focus on the truth as I saw it through my lens. And yes, and since then, more and more people have woken up to this and have said, now I'm ready to look at China as an example, whereas before we just weren't ready. We didn't know what danger we were in, but this country is in danger, and I think there's always hope because we have our faith. So but we have to maintain it.
Exactly.
And that is the absolute key to everything.
So I'm going to mention these now. I'll mention them again at the end. The two documentaries that I think are very worth everyone's time. The first one, Hard to Believe, which is about the organ harvesting and then the sale of organs of political prisoners who can be rallied up very easily and, gathered up very easily and put in prison without trial, without really any substantial accusation. And that there's actually a transplant tourism industry where people can actually go to China and schedule their heart transplant on a particular day. And as one of the people in the documentary said, how can you schedule it for a particular day unless they know that someone's heart's going to be available that day? So that's the documentary, Hard to Believe. And then your second documentary, Finding Courage, is about a family that has worked relentlessly to get the truth revealed about their sister's death as a political prisoner in China. And then, of course, the book that we've been talking about, Who Are China's Walking Dead? I just wanted to make that plug, and we'll mention it again at the end. But there are three aspects of the book that were very telling for me, and I would like you to explain them because I think it will give people a sense of what you're dealing with. So the first one is the story about the sparrows. People are very familiar with famines in China, and there have been all sorts of reasons why there was the famine, etc., because, of course, truth is concealed. Tell the story about the sparrows.
Yes, I like this story as much as it's a crazy story, but I like this story because when you think about the sparrows, it's easier to think about than if you were to think of this story as being about human beings, which is how the Chinese Communist Party does treat human beings. But the sparrows is a good example. And my father was there during that time in China. So in China, Mao Zedong was ruling the nation, and he enacted many policies that caused great damage. One was the time when I called it the sparrow side, and a genocide of sparrows, which seems ridiculous. And one of my interviewees told me about that, and my father hadn't talked about that, though he had told me that they had to eat sparrows sometimes when they didn't have enough food, which I thought was kind of strange. But he didn't tell me more. But one of my interviewees told me, he said, we had to kill all of the sparrows. Remember that? And I'm looking at him thinking, no, I don't remember that. I was not alive in the 1950s. This was the late 1950s. And I was never taught that in school. And so I fact check everything very carefully. And I went and I fact checked his story, and I find out that I didn't know this is probably the worst environmental disaster in history, and we're not taught about it. And this is where Mao Zedong decided that all the sparrows had to be killed.
Now, why? Why did they have to be killed?
Why? Because they were labeled pests, because they eat bugs, and that they also eat rice. So they were damaging some of the rice harvest, not to a very bad extent. I mean, human beings have always lived with birds, and that they have dual purpose. Yes, they eat bugs, and they actually prevent damage to harvest, but they do also eat some of the grains. So, but Mao Zedong decided we needed another political campaign. So it works at different levels. On the surface, it makes no sense. At another level, well, okay, yes, we want to increase our rice harvest, our rice crops. So let's destroy something that eats it, that is reducing our rice crops a little bit each year. Okay, so the sparrows. And then at another level, it's a political campaign. And it's this concept of struggle, which the the Communist Party in general has, where you split a society into two groups and they fight against each other. And when it's humans against sparrows, well, the humans won. And so I found all this footage. There was video cameras, black and white, that had documented this. There was plenty of photos throughout the country of China and I watched young Chinese families and children and elderly were killing sparrows. Some had guns, but others, they would use brooms and not let the sparrows rest on any branches. So they would chase the sparrows around relentlessly all day. This was what they had to do. And this happened nationwide. It sounds so crazy, but I saw all the video footage about it. And these poor little birds would drop dead on the ground from exhaustion. And so then all the citizens would gather them up, and they made like long braids from these dead birds, and they would take them to Communist Party officials who had tables where they would count them up, and so that they could report back to the central government that they were doing a good job for their sparrow killing campaign. And then they were taken away on these big, I watched these big trucks full of mounds, feet high, of dead sparrows. And the next year, after this sparrowcide, there were no sparrows. Well, I mean, it's estimated that billions were killed. And the bugs that the sparrows normally eat killed the crops. And there were other policies in place as well at the same time that helped with this, creating this famine. But killing the sparrows played a big role in this, because the bugs came and destroyed the crops. I mean, this is how Mother Nature works. And then that led to they call it the Great Famine, but it's in no way is it great other than it killed an estimated 45 million people. You think about that, 45 million people killed within 2 or 3 years. And that's when my family escaped. And if they had stayed, would they have survived the famine? I don't know. They were very, very fortunate that they had church members that helped them get out through Hong Kong. So, that I call that the sparrowcide. And this is how they treat animals. And the Communist Party treats human beings not much better than animals when they want to run a political campaign to instill fear, to instill terror, and to remove belief in anything else other than the party. So yeah, I found that story a good way to a good example of how the regime operates, and a little bit easier to take than some of their human killing campaigns.
Yes. And again, I won't, editorialize on this, but I think people can see similarities between what's happened in the past couple of years and the killing of sparrows. It'd be nice to say that they meant well, but even if they meant well with the mindset that they had, there are always going to be unintended consequences. And I think that's the value of learning from the sparrow story, because everybody did it. We're going to go kill the sparrows without thinking, okay, so what will the net effect be of no sparrows? Okay, the second thing I'd like to talk about is this expression that comes up somewhat frequently in your book about exposing bone. And this was a new concept for me. The first time you bring it up, I'm like, what is she talking about? But then the more you explained it, I realized that I've seen things like this in my own life. So explain a little bit what exposing bone means.
Yes. It is where it may be where someone may think of, in the past, women would keep their skirt below the knee. Didn't want to show too much skin. It could be seen as you're revealing too much. And so with women, it may be being flirtatious, but this exposing bone concept came from mostly male, Chinese Communist Party officials. And so you have to keep the truth hidden. You cannot reveal your true motives. You cannot, it does come back to the truth. This whole concept of truth is that the bone is the reality. It's what's essentially keeping your body together, but you don't want to show it. And as someone may put on a fancy coat to give the impression of wealth or a different status, or to change their visual, perception that people have of them, the exposing bone could be something the Chinese use it in. It's also with language. You don't want to expose bone. And they have these amazing sayings. And this is where so many people had said to me when they watched my movie, Finding Courage, they saw that I had some interviews from these Chinese Communist Party officials in the movie, but only a few minutes. And they said, I want to know more about those guys. They seem very interesting. I haven't heard from people like that before. Why don't you tell their stories in a movie? I said, I cannot. It's like that. They would say, one of them might say a sentence with exposing bone in it, and then that term, and I'm thinking, wow, what does that mean? And then within a moment, he's talking about something different, because to him, exposing bone, they've been talking about that all their, it's a term that they use all their lives to, it's a form of euphemism. Instead of saying, don't tell the truth, or don't let anyone see the bone, don't let them see the truth, that could get you into trouble. That's essentially what it means. So these officials told me so many terms like this that if I tried to put that into a movie, no one would be able to watch it, because you really couldn't understand what they were saying. And I had to take each sentence of what they said, and my reaction was exactly as yours. My first reaction to them was, what on earth is he talking about? Until I started to unpack it. And that's why I felt, okay, I have to write this as a book, because books allow that opportunity where visuals don't. Because you can't always, this type of, how do you explain the exposing bone concept in a video, or a movie? It's very challenging. So yes, it's that, those concepts that they have and the euphemisms they use to hide the truth and to talk about the truth without saying the truth. That's what all these terms mean. And I do come back to that sort of concept a lot in the book, where I have to break down the terms they use, because they cannot talk in normal language anymore, especially the officials, those in that high-ranking officialdom. They just cannot talk in normal language. They've been conditioned to talk in this kind of double think or double speak. If you've ever read George Orwell's 1984, which I hope more people have, that's really the language that they've been trained to think and operate in, and that's a good example of it.
Right. I think, though, what you get from these interviews and such, that these people have gone from being the walking dead, which is their term. You didn't make that term up, to being the walking wounded. Now at least they know they're wounded. I don't think before they necessarily knew that.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I really didn't like the term walking dead, because to call any human being walking dead, in a negative sense, would put me, if I was to look down on someone and call them the walking dead in a derogatory way, then I feel, how am I better than those wanting to, these socialist strategists who want to put, gain control and dominion over another group of human beings. So I see that term as, because they are the ones who gave me that term, they have used this themselves, and it has come historically. It was more than 50 years ago that there was a well-known Chinese scholar who escaped communism, and he went to Hong Kong and he watched, and he just knew if he stayed in China, he would become the walking dead. And he said, this is where the country's going. And their translation was not quite walking dead. It was soulless body, flesh, soulless flesh, walking flesh. And I asked the translator, can I use the term walking dead? Because the other words you're giving me are not going to translate at all to an American audience. I don't get it. She said, yes, Walking Dead is accurate, though it's not a literal translation.
Okay. So to close this up, this is the final thing I want to talk about. So we get this view of the CCP as being brutal, can do whatever they want. Why is it that they imprison dissenters, being it Christians or missionaries or even people of other religious persuasions like the Falun Gong, which are Buddhist in their orientation? You would think it'd just be easy to just get rid of them. Why do they spend time and effort trying to dislodge them from their religious beliefs?
I think there's two main reasons. One is that history still exists. No matter how much they try to wipe it out and rewrite it, it still exists in us as human beings. And that is, I think that's absolutely a God-given trait of that we have. We remember. We have memories, and we are able to speak and pass those memories down to our children. And so it is so hard for any tyrannical regime to remove those memories from people, because if you kill somebody, what they've learned is, especially through the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, where 10,000 students, an estimated 10,000 students were killed on the square by the CCP, they learned that the public, because that went international, there was international journalists there, they saw this, the whole world saw that footage, that destruction, the murder. They realized that's just too messy. And this is why the communist strategists, and they don't want that bloodshed. One is the optics are bad because people will talk about it. But people also remember, and there will be people who will want revenge for their family member that's been murdered or wrongfully imprisoned or tortured. So how do you change that? Well, I mean, psychologically, there's on a small scale, you look at people who abuse someone else. There's a Stockholm syndrome where a victim will come to love or justify or understand the abuse that they receive. And then they start to accept that, and they start to accept the reality that their abuser imposes on them, even if it means replacing their faith. They take on the faith of their abuser. And so on a large scale, it's not unlike what's happened in China, where the Communist Party over decades, through generations, has been able to rewrite the memories and the love within people's hearts, within the youth, so much so that they often they've been taught to equate the Communist Party with the love for their mother. And that is a long-term goal. To just kill a dissident creates anger and hatred and optics, bloody optics that are hard to clean up publicly. But a long-term goal is to change people's minds, replace institutions with the state. And that's what we face today. We are not looking at the bloody massacres of the sparrows and of the students on Tiananmen Square. We are looking at cultural infiltration, subversion, and all of these communist tactics that have been used since the time. I mean, Karl Marx talked about his goals, and those goals are still embedded within these goals here, but just the tactics change. And that's what we are facing, and that's why they don't just kill people. They want to destroy their spirit and break them so that they will come to love the party. Because if they just die, then they're almost a martyr, really. I mean, there are people that have died for their faith, and they have not succumbed to the Communist Party. They put God above the party, and they stood for that. And that sent shockwaves. I've interviewed many survivors like this, where their faith, their memory has revived other people's faith around them and sent shockwaves throughout their communities, where people see that their strength and their conviction and faith in God was greater than the party. And the party cannot stand that. If it is an evil spectre, as I believe it is, then it is very jealous of God and is trying to destroy people's faith, so it would only have faith in it. But when we cannot be destroyed, when our faith cannot be destroyed, then ultimately the spectre will lose. That's how I see it.
Exactly. And they use words, euphemistic words like transformation. We've got to transform this person who believes in Jesus Christ, let's say, into someone who realized that the Chinese Communist Party is where your faith should lie. So we're familiar with words like brainwashing, which was probably a poor translation. Thought reform is probably a better translation. But I think it's a testimony to that the truth does set you free. So they have to suppress the truth. They don't have to suppress consumerism. They don't have to suppress materialism, because that feeds into how they keep a hold on their people. But they have to suppress something that says there's a higher law than the law of individuals or the state.
Exactly right. And that's why we see in China, we see shiny buildings and glittering skylines at night, and we see that people have become rich and wealthy, and that consumerism has been driven by the party. And people have said to me, well, but see, the Communist Party is different to the time of former communist leaders. The party has changed, and I can easily say you've been duped if you think that. That's exactly what they want you to think. The party has not changed its constitution. It has not changed its goals or directives. It just changes a different tactic, a different strategy. It gives you, it gives you some pleasure on the surface, makes you forget about some of your suffering, because maybe you've got a fancy car now. You won't care that you're no longer allowed to go to church. But if that's where you put your values, then that's the dangerous situation, because if you're prioritizing being wealthy over being humanly wealthy monetarily in this world as opposed to being spiritually wealthy, then that's where I think our priorities are wrong. And
exactly.
And people not looking at China in that sense. And I think we need to be looking at everywhere in that sense, especially within our own hearts, and just remembering that where do we put our priorities?
And the other thing you point out, and I can't remember now whether it was in one of the documentaries of the book, because like I said, I did a deep dive, but a lot of the prison labor camps on the outside look like regular buildings. They might be labeled drug rehabilitation centers, but Americans, and specifically people with a conscience that says this is awful, we have to understand that when something is made in China, it might be being made by someone who is imprisoned because of their religious or political beliefs. So we don't want to be accomplices, and the more we know allows us not to be bystanders who I believe God will hold liable. You know, your book takes the curtain away, and now people will have the opportunity to say, I saw it. What's my responsibility now? Or I'll pretend I didn't see it.
Yes. And that takes courage, I think, because it's easier for us just to pretend we didn't see it. But we have a global world now. We've seen what happened with COVID. We saw what happened with the virus being spread around the world, and China lying point blank about it, and that causing all these lockdowns for us, and the complete change of lifestyle and freedom for us here in the West. So that's when we realize, I think it just becomes crystal clear that if we had really taken the Chinese Communist Party's crimes seriously before, then this would not have happened. And I did an interview with a human rights lawyer who was in one of our in the movie Hard to Believe, and he said that, look, if we had really done something about the crimes of the Communist Party, then we would never have allowed this to happen. And I really think he's right, because The crimes of communism have never been tried. They've never been brought before a jury. They've never been held accountable. And yet, the biggest mass murderers in our history are the communist rulers, specifically the Chinese Communist Party, Soviet communist leaders not too far behind. And we are not taught about that in school. We are not taught about the crimes. And that, I think, is a serious problem that we have to address. And we also need to question why. Because if we knew that, we would be doing things very differently, because we would not be interacting with business in China in the same way. And I know so many businesses that they've lost a lot of money and intellectual property to China because they thought they could save a few bucks. That, again, that short-term thinking that the communists want us to have instead of long-term thinking. We want to save a few bucks, go to China, make our businesses there, and then sell it back to Americans over here while we lose jobs for our local communities. And at the same time, what does the CCP do? They steal the patents, intellectual property, workflow processes from those companies, create cheap knockoffs, and drive those American companies out of business. And this has happened again and again. And if we really recognized that we are not dealing with a normal government in China, we are dealing with a very dangerous regime that's holding the people hostage, then we would really be dealing with, we'd be doing things very differently, and we wouldn't be selling out for a short few dollars here and there. We'd be putting more effort in our local communities and our families and our faith here in the US rather than just selling out to China. And I hope that my book can give a little bit of insight into that and help people see that they can do things in small ways. You don't have to become an activist or anything like that, but you can start to look at, where is this made? And if it's not bought in China, if it's made in China, you don't have to buy it. And you're not hurting the Chinese people by not supporting the regime. All the businesses in China, to survive in China, your business has to have some connection to the Chinese Communist Party. And I've met so many people that have come out of forced prison labor in China, and they worked under horrendous conditions. They want Americans to know that they're making our products in slave labor. They do not want us to be supporting slave labor conditions. So I can say from personal firsthand experience that with these people, that by making a choice with your dollar, you're not actually harming the Chinese people. You are helping them because they are beholden to this evil regime. So I think there's just little things that we can do. And I hope that comes through in the book, that we all can take some sort of responsibility, at least with our having a bit more long-term thinking, I hope.
And I can tell you that that's the effect that your work has had on me. So I'm going to repeat the names of the documentaries: Hard to Believe, and the other is Finding Courage, and then the book, Who Are China's Walking Dead. But let's say, Kay, that's not enough, Kay Rubacek, for people, and they want more of what things you're working on now and other ways to potentially support your efforts. How can they get a hold of you? Where can they find out more about you?
My website is the best place. It's got links to all my social media. It's got an email list. It's got an email contact form. You can get in touch with me directly there. And that is just my name, kayrubacek.com. And that's Rubacek. So that's where you can get me.
Very good. Well, I wish you well. I know that what you do is not risk-free, because very few things that are important and challenge evil are risk-free. But I appreciate your efforts. And listeners, I hope you make use of the resources that we mentioned. And if you happen to have any questions or comments and you forget how to get a hold of Kay, you can send them along to me at outofthequestionpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll make sure that she gets them. So again, thank you, Kay, and listeners, I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to Out of the Question. For more information on this and other topics, please visit chalcedon.edu.